Good evening. It's Tuesday night, so that means we have a few questions have come in to answer. Dear Ajahn, I realize that whenever there is an improvement or true realization in my practice, it is always followed by a series of unwholesome desires, such as engagement in sensual pleasure or some unwholesome events will occur to deviate me from the path. And it's difficult to restrain myself in such case. I always waste a lot of time not doing my practice and having regressions on my path of practice. Could you kindly advise what one can do to prevent such a problem? Yep, I think this is a very common experience, the kind of ups and downs, stops and starts of the practice, going a bit forward then slipping back. It's because we haven't yet established what we call our spiritual faculties, our indriya, five indriya, are not yet fully maintained and established. So there's times when everything seems to come together and we have faith, saddha, which is the first of those, and that prompts us to put forth effort, virya, and the effort is bringing up mindfulness, sati, and the continuity of sati brings samadhi, states of stillness, calm, and that supports realization, insight, panya. But the thing is, we can't sustain it. We put forth effort and then we get tired, we run out of steam, and the mind seems to go flat, no energy left. We put forth effort, but then there's this sense of running out of steam. And at that point, often all kinds of coarse or worldly thoughts come back into the mind. The way the forest teachers say, it's like the kilesas are fighting back. You push them down through your effort and being mindful, and maybe you achieve various things. You achieved a state of calm, rapture, and then had some insight as well. But it's not sustained, so then the kilesas flood back in. It's just like a battle between two sides, and one side is temporarily defeated and then they regroup and come back seemingly stronger than before. And you feel defeated by your own mental defilements that arise after putting forth all this effort because you can't sustain it. Then the greed, the desires, the distractions, the irritations, the doubts, the worries, they all come flooding back in. And it seems like we didn't get anything from the practice. Where did it all go? Where did all that effort go to? But just as the effort can disappear, well, so can these different unskillful states of mind which return. They can also disappear. But it just takes a bit of time for us to regroup our wholesome effort, bring up the energy, the mindfulness again. So we have to be aware of that dynamic, become mindful of this dynamic where energy is strong and mindfulness becomes strong, and then how it fades again. And just accept it. But we have to try and maintain mindfulness as much as possible, even in those moments when our energy flags and the unwholesome states of mind start to flood back in. Just try and keep as mindful as you can, as patient as you can with it. And little by little you might find that your mind doesn't slip back as far as it used to. And those unwholesome states don't take so long to clear up again as they used to. This is progress in the practice. Little by little your mind doesn't slip back so far. So patient effort and then maintaining mindfulness even in the bad times. Don't give up. And try and maintain that mindfulness and bring up the effort in whatever way you can as the mind is reacting and the kilesas are coming back in. So people find they might have a day or a night where they really put forth a lot of effort. They try harder in their meditation, walking or sitting meditation. They try harder than before, and they do seem to be very peaceful, and they may have some awareness of letting go of something. But then because they use up both physical and mental energy doing that, then the mind seems to degenerate again and just want distraction, wants to follow craving again. Because it's used up all that good energy and effort, and then it can't sustain it. So it's at those times you have to be very patient, and you depend on patience, kanti barami, and mindfulness, and just try and observe and learn through the bad times when the mind is all distracted again. And you may have to develop some strategies for what to do at those times, how to skillfully prevent disaster. So even though your mindfulness slips and your mind is seeking distraction again, going back to the world, you have to use some wisdom at that time also and have some strategies. What are you going to do? How are you going to practice when everything has gone flat? You've got no energy. And you also need to rely on your sila, your precepts, and that's often coming from wisdom as well. See the need to keep your precepts at a time when you've lost your energy and your anger or your desires are coming back stronger than before. Don't let them make you break the precepts. So how do we keep the precepts? Well, sometimes we just have to rely on determination, resolution. You say, I'm not going to break my precept, whatever. So if it's the 5 precepts, so even if I get really angry because I've lost all my energy and I'm fed up with the world or with life, I'm not going to break my precept and say or do something in anger, hurt somebody. I'm not going to, if I have desire come up, sensual desire, I'm not going to let it lead into unskillful behaviour that will break the precepts, to steal, or commit acts of sexual misconduct, cheat on my partner, say, or go out and get drunk. You use the precepts and you determine to keep them even when you're feeling in a really confused or state or have strong desires or you're very angry. You're not going to give in and break the precepts. All of this is good practice which will have its effect to gradually erode away and limit the effects of your mental defilements when they do come up. They won't come up so strongly and they won't be so disturbing the more you determine to keep the precepts. These precepts are gradually cleansing your mind, weakening those negative intentions rooted in greed, anger, delusion. So the longer you keep the precepts well and the more effort you put into that, even if your mind is not peaceful in these periods where you've lost your energy, samadhi has disappeared, and mindfulness is weak, even in those periods, because you're keeping the precepts, you'll find your mind doesn't slip as far back as it used to. So they protect you. And the precepts protect us from disaster. They protect us during the periods where our mindfulness and our effort is weak. So nobody has found that their practice is just some kind of smooth ascent, rising up all the time in one direction. Everybody has periods where their mind slips back, and sometimes it's simply because you've used up so much energy in one period that for a little while afterwards it seems like all your energy is sapped. So you have to be very patient, keep the precepts, come back to basics, have strategies. So another one is keeping the precepts, another strategy is listening to the Dhamma again. Come back, listen to the Dhamma, remind yourself of the teachings, get these wholesome inputs so that you can continue. Or another one, monks understand well, you have periods where your energy drops. You've put forth a lot of energy in your meditation and it's gone well, but then suddenly it's all disappears and you feel like you're back to square one. You've got no energy, no mindfulness, no samadhi. That's the time you tend to do acts of service, dana, and you do useful jobs for the community, you help out other people, because that can also help you through a period where your inner energy level from the meditation has dropped and other defilements are coming in. You use the practice of service and helping other people and helping the community can keep your mind in a wholesome state at a time when your mindfulness drops. And then when you get physical and mental energy back, then you can put more effort into your meditation and maybe go a bit further again. So be prepared for it. Don't expect your mind to always be blissful and radiant and mindfulness to always be perfect. Be ready for those periods where it drops, but don't give up. Simply have some strategies and plans for those times. Get them ready on hand. Another question. Sadhu Lumpur. Discussing the Dhamma is non-exhaustive and brightens up the mind because it's wholesome. I have a lot of questions relating to my practice, but as I listen to Lumpur's Dhamma talks and the Dhamma from these Dhamma teachings, upon contemplating I find the answers to these questions. However, I also feel bad to take up the teacher's time, for my progress in the cultivation is I should continue to practice through establishing continuous mindfulness throughout the day. I have difficulty establishing mindfulness when not in formal sitting or walking meditation. What I do when the mind runs is contemplate phenomena as impermanent, unsatisfactory and not self. At other times I watch the intention before the action, but after a while my mind runs again. Recently, after memorizing the Chinabanchara Gatha chanting, the mind naturally goes to chant the Victor's Armour protection, but after the verse Hadaye me anuruddho sariputto jadakine, the mind runs again. Out of compassion, may you advise the more effective way to establish continuous mindfulness in daily activities. Effort directed to bringing up mindfulness, directing your mind to pay attention. So chanting is a very good one, because it's a very clear object. If you have a chant, whether it's a sutta, a parita, or the Chinabanchara Gatha, or one of the reflections, chanting holds your attention very well. So people use chanting even when they're doing other activities. Sometimes they recite a chant like Iti Piso or Chinabanchara Gatha to bring up mindfulness, pay attention. Or just take the one word like Buddho. So you can be walking along, quietly reciting Buddho to keep your mindfulness there, to keep your mind present in the moment. You can be sitting down doing a simple task, or standing at a sink washing dishes, or gardening, or doing various simple tasks that don't require a lot of thought or communication with other people, and you can recite Buddho as you do those fairly straightforward tasks. If you are doing tasks and activities that involve talking to people, making decisions, having to think and plan things, well, you have to maybe make the actual planning of the task or the conversation with that person as the object of your mindfulness. And then your mindfulness may turn to just keeping the precepts in that situation. So you're practicing right speech, mindfulness of speech as you talk to someone, to maintain your mindfulness with metta and speaking the truth, speaking that which is useful and helpful in that situation, and also maybe listening to the other person. Or if it's a complex task that involves planning and doing different things, well, just try to pay attention to that task and you'll do it well. And it's about putting the effort into paying attention to what needs to be attended to. So if it's a complex task, that's what you're paying attention to. If it's a conversation, that's where you practice your mindfulness in the speaking and the listening. But other tasks, as I said, you may be paying attention and training mindfulness by reciting Buddho, or some people even can turn to the breath through the day as they're doing different activities. Or at least occasionally through the day you pause, put everything on pause, press the pause button and just take 1 minute out to follow the breathing, just to compose your mind, bring it to the present moment, or take a few deep breaths to bring your mind back to the present moment. Because as you say, it's been running with thoughts, and as the mind runs, the thoughts become often become more unskillful, more distracted, and one thought leads to another thought, and often we find ourselves becoming less mindful, and then more negative, unskillful thoughts slip in. We get more desire coming up, or more negativity, aversion coming up, or anxiety coming up. So we need to be able to press the pause button sometimes, just take a few deep breaths, or come back to your posture. The Buddha said the beginning of mindfulness of the body begins with posture. And you're always in one posture or another. So whether you're falling asleep at night or waking up in the morning, you can be aware of your posture as you're lying there. And you can follow the breath as you fall asleep, or pick up the breath as you wake up. As you're getting dressed, you're aware of your posture. You come back to the physical movements of your hands and your body as you get dressed, as you go about your daily business in the morning, preparing your breakfast, moving around, walking to a car or to a train, or walking here, walking there. You're using your posture as a basis for mindfulness. And especially people who've done retreats where they've done sitting and walking meditation and simple activities, cleaning up in the retreat center or the monastery, they find they do learn how to practice mindfulness of posture, and then they can use that through their day. So you can have a number of different objects of mindfulness which you can employ even when you're busy. Even when you go shopping, you can be mindful of your posture, walking, and mindful of talking if you're talking to somebody, when you're buying things. Mindful of, obviously the harder part is to be more mindful on a refined level of your mental states as you're shopping or going here, going there, doing your business. But you still try to keep the precepts, so that becomes a basis for mindfulness as well. And then notice mind states, like you say, be aware of mind states arising and passing away. You may have memories that come in, as you're doing one task, you have memories about something totally unrelated come into the mind, and they may prompt various reactions. You might suddenly feel sad, or suddenly feel angry, remembering something that triggers that. Or you may have some real fantasy or desire pop up. Oh, I really want to do that, and you get all excited. You're doing some other totally unrelated task, but your mind starts bringing memories start popping into the mind. So get used to that. Get used to watching your mind as you do different tasks. And whatever your prime task is, well, bring your mind back to that and observe the impermanent nature of memories and different thoughts that pop into the mind, and get used to observing thoughts arise, pass away. And the more you do it, the more skilled you become at it, and you get to notice different thoughts coming up, even strong emotions or just very mundane thoughts. And you notice things arise, pass away, and say, oh, there's another thought passed away. It didn't last very long. I felt sad just then remembering something that made me sad, but then it passed away, and you're gradually becoming more mindful of the impermanence, the rising and passing away of mental activity. So there's plenty to develop mindfulness around, the posture and the body, feelings of pleasure and pain. That's often what prompts us to change posture, the painful feelings. The pleasure and pain associated with, you feel hungry later in the day and you eat, then you feel pleasure, you feel tired, then you rest, and then you feel good. Good things, enjoyable things happen, you feel happy, and unpleasant things happen, you feel annoyed, sad. So observing body, feelings, changing mind states, these all become the basis for mindfulness through the day. What we call 4 foundations of mindfulness, satipatthana. So, take a few moments here and there to reflect on this. Reflect on the mindfulness, where you're directing your mindfulness. And as you're doing other things, keep introducing the reflection on mindfulness. Where is my mind right now? Ask yourself, what am I doing right now? Where is my mind? What am I thinking? How am I feeling? What posture am I in right now? Get into that habit of asking yourself, learning to pay attention to the present moment. And you'll improve, and you'll get better at it. It's very frustrating, of course, but it's a very beneficial, valuable practice for us, so it's worth putting up with the frustrations. Another question. How do we deal with a situation when somebody doesn't like us and starts spreading false rumors or allegations, accusations? Well, I think this is a very common experience for pretty much everyone in the world, more or less. And it starts when we're kids, doesn't it? People say things about us at school, some of it's true, some of it's not. Then we get older and it can be family members, or it can be work colleagues, or people in our social group, and occasionally even total strangers. So I don't think there's anyone who escapes from this. Sometimes the more well-known someone is, the more it happens, just because more they're in the line of view of so many more people. Well, then some people are jealous, some people are just want to put others down, don't like them being the centre of attention or whatever, or people have different reasons for their behaviour, but it's a very normal experience for human beings. So we have to learn how to reflect on it, bring up the mindfulness, reflect what's going on here. So you've heard somebody says there's a rumour about you, you did this and it's not true. Well, just reflect, is it true or not? This might be the first one. If it's not true, no need to get angry or upset because it's not true. And anyone asks you, you just tell them it's not true. It's annoying, of course, but it's not true. So don't give too much time or thought to the whole thing because it's not true, and you can quickly tell anyone that. Even the Buddha would get people spreading false rumors about him, trying to put him down, usually through jealousy, competitiveness, other teachers, other alms mendicants not happy with him. So his usual response was just stay still, stay quiet, and it will pass. The truth reveals itself after a while. If it's a false rumor, not grounded in any truth, after a while it'll become clear through your good behavior. You keep the precepts, you're patient, you don't react with anger, you don't create further problems, then quite often these things pass, because they're sooner or later the truth comes to light, because they're false rumors. So you can often sit tight, or if anyone asks you directly, you just give them the correct information, tell them what is what, and then maybe just move on, ignore it until it fades. If it's true, if there's some truth to it, if somebody's criticized you and there's some truth to it, you have to accept that, don't you? So we also have to know how to be humble in the right situation at the right time, not just give in to our conceit, our arrogance, but when it's appropriate to be humble and admit our mistakes, or fix them in the best way. Say, I'm going to fix this. So occasionally we need to apologize if we have hurt someone else in some way. Or sometimes we just have to accept a mistake, take responsibility. If it's a genuine error of ourselves, we did it, so we just accept it, learn from it, and then we grow from that. If we're ready, we can even say thank you to the person who points it out. Not easy, because the sense of pride and self doesn't like to, but if you can get into the habit of doing it at the appropriate time, recognizing that person's helping you. If they're pointing out an error, a mistake, they're helping you, so recognize that, and you can even thank them. It's the sign of a wise person, isn't it? Somebody who's interested to improve themselves. They actually can receive feedback when they've done something wrong, and they listen, and they can be appreciative, and then they try to improve themselves. So they don't mind receiving some feedback when it's true. It can help us. So just have to consider the situation. If it's not true, just let it go, move on. Don't worry about it too much. So last question. Can you speak about the forest Ajahn Lumpodun? It's from someone here. Lumpodun, you may have heard of. He was a well-known forest monk, student of Ajahn Mun. And he died the year I went to Thailand, so I never met him, unfortunately. He was born 100 years ago, over 100 years ago now, because when he was a young monk in his 20s, I think it was in the 1920s, so he's probably born around 1900 or just before even. So he's born a long time ago, and he lived in Surin province, which is not too far from Ubon, where I started as a monk, and a well-loved and respected forest master who became the abbot of a famous monastery, Wat Burapha in Surin, and he was known as a great scholar before he was a great meditator. Like so many monks, he began his life as a monk studying the texts and Pali, and was a good scholar. He was good at it. He passed his exams, and he could teach others as well. So he was his teachers expected him to go on and be a teacher of the texts of Pali and the scriptures. But it must have been his karma and his character that he turned to meditation again, like so many of the forest ajahns. He, as a young monk, he saw that study alone is not enough to liberate the mind from suffering, from the mental defilements. We have to turn that knowledge and understanding from the scriptures into practice. So he didn't become a teacher of the scriptures. He moved on looking for a teacher, a meditation teacher. So very similar to Ajahn Chah. And that brought him to, if I remember, his first teacher was Luang Por Singh, and Luang Por Singh was a disciple of Ajahn Mun as well. Before that, if I remember, Luang Por Dun, he'd had strong faith as a layman. He was quite a reliable worker, and his parents, had the usual parental ambitions for their children. They saw this as a reliable, hard-working, clever son, so they wanted him to get married, have a family. So he had asked a few times to become a monk, and they kept saying no. But he was persistent. He just kept asking year after year, and eventually they gave in. But then when they said, if you're going to become a monk, they said, there's one condition: you can't disrobe, which is quite tough, because who knows, when you ordain as a monk, you don't know whether you'll survive your whole life as a monk or disrobe. But they made it a condition. But he was happy to take that on because he did have strong faith. So he became a monk, did his studies, and then started looking for a meditation teacher. So he found Luang Por Singh, who was a disciple of Ajahn Mun, and he started to learn meditation, the recitation of Buddha, and particularly the contemplation of the body, or what we call the Asupa Kammatthana, contemplation of the unattractiveness of the human body, which is what most forest monks learn in the early days. They learn a way to develop basic mindfulness using Buddha or the breath, and then turn to contemplate the body, to see the unattractiveness of the body and to see the body as the four elements. And I remember when he first left the monastery to go out wandering in the forest, he'd go with a teacher, Ajahn Singh, and often with a small group of monks and even novices. And he'd only been a monk a few years, and they were out in the forest, and one of his friends caught malaria. In fact, I think that year they all caught malaria, and this is in the 1920s, and he didn't have any medication in those days. Maybe the most they could expect was herbal medication from the forest. So one of his friends actually died. They nursed him and he died of malaria. And he said that was really an important moment for him in his Dhamma practice, because seeing his friend die just brought it home very clearly that life is uncertain, death is certain, and even as a young man, because he was still in his late 20s when this friend died, he realized he could die just the same. So he said it brought a sense of urgency to his practice, and he contemplated death and the uncertainty of life every day from then on. It was like always in the forefront of his mind, just the fact that he could die at any time in the forest. So he said that really helped his mind to settle down in the meditation, and he gained samadhi quite quickly after that. And a couple of years later, a novice died of malaria again in a small group of monks he was staying with. A novice died, so this happened twice. And he said it just prompted him to really focus on his meditation, to make his mind firm in samadhi, to let go of the hindrances and make the mind really firm and gain that skill. He said these two deaths really kind of pushed him to develop his samadhi skill, and once he could calm his mind, then he would contemplate the impermanence of his own five khandhas, the body, the mind, particularly the corpse meditations. He said when he first gained samadhi, he gained an imitar of the Buddha. It just arose when his mind gathered together in samadhi, and this, he said, beautiful illuminated state of mind, and the nimitta of the Buddha arose. And he said even when he finished his meditation, he got up from his posture. He used to meditate sort of most of the evening, like he'd meditate in the evening, early evening through till late at night into the early hours. But this one time his mind gathered in samadhi and the nimitta of the Buddha arose, and he said when he got up from his meditation, this vision of the Buddha stayed with him. So even with his eyes open, he kept seeing it. It was so strong and so clear, so bright, and it made him very happy. He said he knew it was just a vision, just a nimitta, but it made him very happy. And that lasted for a number of days, I believe, and then faded. But normally when his mind became peaceful, he would turn to contemplate the body. So other times he had visions of himself as a corpse, seeing his skeleton, as many teachers do. He'd have various visions of his body, which helped him to counter the natural tendency towards lust and sensual desire. So he spent a lot of time in the forests in the 1920s with Ajahn Singh, and then he wanted to go and find Ajahn Singh's teacher, who was Ajahn Mun. So eventually he found Ajahn Mun, because in those days there's no way of knowing where Ajahn Mun, the teacher, is. You have to basically walk and ask people, have you seen where Ajahn Mun is, heard where he is these days? Till you eventually find him. It might take many months to do that. So he walked for many months, found Ajahn Mun, and then asked to spend the rains with him. So Ajahn Mun became his teacher, and he said when he was with Ajahn Mun, he got so much confidence in the practice, all he wanted to do was meditate. And he said if you wanted to ask Ajahn Mun a question about anything kind of worldly or ordinary, Ajahn Mun would only speak very briefly what was necessary. But if he wanted to talk about meditation and Dhamma, he'd talk all night. He could talk for hours. So Ajahn Lumpur Dun was very happy to spend a few years living with Ajahn Mun, because he could talk Dhamma, he loved to talk Dhamma, and he had a very good knowledge of the suttas and the scriptures and the Vinaya. So he would have long conversations with Ajahn Mun, which made him very happy. And before he left Ajahn Mun to go on further wandering, when he was a bit more senior, Ajahn Mun sewed a robe by hand, a set of robes, 3 robes, which takes quite a long time if you sew by hand, but he offered it to Lumpur Dun, or the young Lumpur Dun, which is a great honour. Ajahn Mun didn't do that for many monks, but he did for Lumpur Dun. So Lumpur Dun would wear the robes his own teacher sewed for him by hand. And it was a way of like sort of recollecting the teacher every day, and he said it just gave him so much energy in his practice. He had to commit and dedicate himself to the practice. Now he was wearing robes sewn by the teacher. So he went off wandering and had to deal with many obstacles. I believe at one point this set of robes was damaged because he was with a couple of novice monks. They're wandering in one forest and they encountered a wild buffalo. In the old days you'd get wild buffalo, wild ox in the forest, and they would be quite dangerous because they would charge. They're very heavy, large animals with horns, and they would charge people, knock them down, and could kill you by gouging out your stomach. So they met a very angry wild buffalo, and the 2 novices were behind Lumpur Dun, and I think they just scattered, ran for it. Lumpur Dun faced it and it charged him, but it only managed to stick its horn through his robe, his monk's robe, and maybe scraped his skin a little bit, but no serious injury. So the novices came out of hiding and found Lumpur Dun and were amazed that he hardly had a scratch on him, but he did have a hole in his robe, which they had to patch up. So that increased their faith in him. And he wandered around, mostly around northeast Thailand, for many, many years, until eventually he was invited to settle at Wat Burapha in his hometown of Surin, where he became the abbot and became well known for basically building the monastery, built the Abodhita hall, and teaching. He became a well-known teacher, and many, many monks liked to go and see him. He's also well known for one other thing. He met Lumpur Phan, who became another very well-known teacher and disciple of Ajahn Mun, and he was, if I remember right, he was the one who introduced Lumpur Phan to Lumpur Mun. And Lumpur Phan was a great meditator. Lumpur Dun and Lumpur Phan had great respect for each other, and he took Lumpur Phan to meet Ajahn Mun so he could train with him. So this is like the action of a Kalyana Mitta. A true Dhamma friend takes you to a good teacher to practice. So that's what he did with Lumpur Phan. And he knew many, many of the Ajahn Mun disciples. They would meet him and they'd like to talk Dhamma. And then once he was established in his monastery, he became well known as a Dhamma teacher, and people would travel from all over the country to see him. Even the king of Thailand is well known for visiting him and asking Dhamma questions. Many of these questions and conversations you can read about. There are a couple of books translated into English. I think one of them is Teachings He Left Behind, or something like that, the title. And you can read the king of Thailand went to see him and asked him, complained that there's so many mental defilements in the mind of a human, which one do you contemplate? Where do you start in the practice? And Lumpur Dun said, whichever one comes up first. You focus your awareness on your mind, and whatever defilement arises first, that's the one you contemplate. Whether it's greed, anger, delusion, fear, anxiety, whichever. And he's very well known for one very succinct summary of the Four Noble Truths that's often quoted. He gave this, used this teaching over and over again. It's considered a bit of a Zen teaching, very similar to a Zen style of teaching, where he said, when the mind moves out from itself, this is what we call samudaya, the origin of suffering. The result of the mind moving out from itself is suffering, dukkha. The mind observing the mind is the path of practice, or magga. And the result of the mind observing the mind is the cessation of dukkha, nirodha. That's the Four Noble Truths. And this teaching is often quoted, and it's a very useful little set of teachings to use, as almost like as a recollection in daily life. When your mind moves out, you lose your mindfulness. You start to create suffering of one kind or another. You're giving in to some kind of desire, craving, liking, disliking, and it will take you towards suffering. When you bring your mindfulness up, you establish awareness, observing your own mind, then the suffering passes, the craving fades. So that's cessation, nirodha. And you can use this little formula quite easily at any time in your day. When you are establishing mindfulness in the midst of your busy day, then bring up this formula and reflect on it. It's quite useful. Because he was such a skilled meditator, he's quite well known for answering and solving. Different monks would have problems, like a very common problem meditators have, not just monks, lay people as well, but one is when people gain samadhi, they often get attached to samadhi, the bliss of samadhi, or maybe nimittas, like light nimittas, brightness of the mind, or the feelings of rapture and joy and happiness. People can become lost or very attached to this, and so he would teach them to contemplate the impermanence of samadhi and not to attach to nimittas. There's one famous story when he had an older man who had a family and worked, and then had faith and became a monk later in life and put a lot of effort into his meditation, but he perhaps wasn't so wise, so he reached a point where he experienced what we call the vipassanupa kilesas, the kilesas of vipassana, where you have strong mindfulness, strong radiance of citta, and you think you're enlightened. So this old man, thought he was enlightened, an arahant. And he turned up at Lumpur Dun's monastery one day and stood outside his kuti, his monk's hut in the monastery where he lived, and started shouting up at him at his kuti. This was late in the night, if I remember right. Started shouting at him. He said, Dun, come out. The Arahant is here. Come and pay respects to the Arahant. Even though this old monk was actually a disciple of Lumpur Dun, he wasn't his teacher, but he's so deluded he thought he'd become the teacher and he was the enlightened teacher. So strong conceit, self-view and strong delusion. So he's standing there, and the whole monastery woke up and came out to see what all the fuss was about. And this old Lungta, this old granddad monk, was shouting at Lumpur Dun, who was very equanimous because he was an arahant, so he was totally calm, equanimous, and he came down. But he didn't bow to the the old monk who was older in years but junior in range retreats. The custom is you bow to seniority, so he didn't bow to him. So this old monk who was deluded carried on with his delusion to say, "Oh, you should be bowing to me. I'm an arahant. I'm the enlightened one now." And Lumpur Dun decided the only way to kind of get him out of his deluded state was to make him angry. So he kept finding ways to criticize him and tell him that he was deluded and lost his way. I can't remember exactly what he said, but basically his strategy was to make him angry. And I think he succeeded. Basically, he wasn't recognizing that he was enlightened. He was saying, you're not enlightened, and making him know that he knew that he wasn't enlightened. So he got very upset, angry, and got his possessions together and stormed off to another nearby forest monastery. But because he was angry, the emotion, the negative emotion and the movement of mind and all the thinking, after a while, when he arrived at the other monastery, after a while he realized he couldn't possibly be an arahant because he's still angry, and arahants don't get angry. So it worked. He eventually calmed down, realized his mistake, and came back and apologized to Lumpur Dun. Maybe it's one of those rare occasions you can use anger if you know what you're doing. The monks were all petrified when they saw Lumpur Dun getting this old guy angry. They were all petrified that something was going to happen. But Lumpur Dun seemed to know what he was doing, and he got the guy so angry he realized he's not enlightened. So occasionally anger can have its value in that situation. And they once asked Lumpur Dun himself, they said, "Do you ever get angry?" And he said, "Well, the situation can prompt anger. I can be in a situation where anger is prompted or triggered, but I don't take hold of it with my mind." So he doesn't get angry. But it's not like he's not in situations that would normally make you angry. It's just he doesn't take hold of it or take ownership of that anger. So he, once or twice he came to visit Lumpur Cha, and Lumpur Cha and him had great respect for each other because they didn't live that far apart. And he was a highly respected meditation master and did a lot to promote both the study of Buddhism. I think he built a study school at his monastery. So he wasn't just a meditator, he also encouraged the scriptural study, and many young monks in Thailand will study the scriptures, take exams in Pali and so on. And he encouraged that, and then of course he also encouraged the practice of meditation and was a very skilled teacher. And I think he died in 1983, the year I arrived in Thailand. So unfortunately I never met him, but read a little bit of his teachings and heard stories about him. And there are, as I said, if you Google him, Lumpur Dun Adulo, online there are 1 or 2 books translated of his teachings. So that's tonight's Q&A session, and we'll leave it there.